Hey there, Kyle Kelly here. And for this week's podcast, I'm going to be doing my podcast based off of Theodore Adorno. And I'm choosing him this week because his ideas are very applicable to what we're talking about streaming culture, pop music, and film scores. So here we go. Who is Theodore Adorno? He was a German philosopher, sociologist, and trained musician associated with the Frankfurt School, which is a group of Marxist thinkers analyzing culture and capitalism, which will become a very big theme here. He fled Nazi Germany, settled in the United States, and while he was in America, he observed Hollywood, jazz, radio broadcasting, and advertising culture, and did not like what he saw at all. He believed that capitalism had transformed art into a product, something standardized and mass-produced while being consumed passively, and music in particular became a commodity. So, he argued that under capitalism, art became industrialized. For example, cars becoming industrialized, or toothpaste, whatever the deal may be. Instead of art challenging society, it's reinforcing it and getting comfortable with it. So instead of originality, we're getting standardization. He believed that popular music followed very predictable formulas, like repetitive hooks. We see this a lot in the 40s and the 50s. Familiar chord progressions, same thing. The blues, the 4 chord to the 1 chord. Emotional cliches. To him, pop music wasn't spontaneous expression. It was really just a manufactured comfort in a way. He distinguished between serious music like Schoenberg or Liszt, whose atonal works disrupted listeners and kind of required active listening. Popular music, which encouraged passive listening and emotional manipulation. He used 2 key terms: standardization, which meant songs are structurally the same, and pseudo-individualization, which means small surface differences make songs seem unique. For example, if 20 pop songs use the same 4 chords, but different production, voices, and branding, are they really different? Something to think about. So let's fast forward to modern day, and we're going to focus a little bit on streaming platforms like Spotify. Spotify uses algorithms to recommend songs based on listening behaviors. So the question relating to here is, are we choosing the music, or is the music choosing us? And I can relate to this to my own personal experience because I used Apple Music for a long time, and I chose to switch over to Spotify because of the fact that it recommended so much great stuff to me, especially when I was a teenager going into college. I was having a really hard time discovering new music, especially trying to become a jazz musician. I really didn't know where to look. I didn't know any of the greats or any of the R&B greats or anything like that. And when I hopped onto Spotify and gave that a try, it gave me recommendations upon recommendations upon, it's just in your face. So personally, that's why I switched over. And that relates to this concept here. Streaming platforms reward short intros. By rewarding, I mean these are the songs that they'll recommend to the category of people like me, who are trying to discover new songs and don't really know where to look. So they'll award songs with short intros to avoid skipping, songs that have catchy hooks in the first 30 seconds, songs that are optimized for playlists, not albums. You get a lot of singles recommended to you on Spotify. and mood-based categories like chill vibes, workout hits, or dance music, whatever. So Adorno would definitely argue that this is the culture industry perfective. Music can become background noise, mood regulation, or productivity enhancement rather than deep engagement. Even worse, the algorithm promotes what's already successful, reinforcing homogeneity. This is standardization at scale, and artists often adapt their songwriting to the algorithm. I can't speak English. Algorithmic logic. Look at people like, The Weeknd or Drake. Definitely Drake. These are people whose songs over the years have felt, mass produced or falling into a certain algorithm like this. This is also a completely different topic, but we see this in social media a lot too. People creating YouTube videos that hook you within the first 3 seconds, no intro. Mr. Beast, for example, we're just jumping right into the video. I'm offering this guy $1 million, and da 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 happens, and that just gets the viewer going. And it's the same thing with music. A lot of artists are producing their songs in a way that follows this algorithm that Spotify and other listening platforms really like. Something to think about. So Adorno would definitely not say that Spotify increases musical diversity. He'd probably argue it creates an illusion of choice. Pop music, like Taylor Swift and Drake, we were just talking about, can release music that's emotional and deeply personally authentic. But structurally, much of the mainstream pop relies on predictive harmonic cycles, lyrical themes of love, heartbreak, or empowerment. The big three in a way. That's what you see in all of these super popular songs. Adorno would say that the individuality lies in branding and not persona. Branding and persona, not structure. That doesn't mean the music is bad, but it means the system shapes the form. He believed listeners developed what called regressive listening, consuming music as emotional reassurance rather than critical experience. Streaming playlists amplify this. A really good example is lo-fi beats to study to, which is if you just go on YouTube, you can find a 24-hour, chill lo-fi hip hop, playlist, and you can just do your homework to. With this little anime girl doing her homework that's become very famous on screen. And this is just a perfect example of what we're talking about here, with music becoming functional, not disruptive. In film music, we'll use the Marvel Studios movies as our example here. Marvel Studios produces emotionally predictable arcs using very common techniques like minor keys for tragedy or using percussion for tension. Adorno wrote about Hollywood film music, arguing it tells audiences exactly how to feel. Instead of ambiguity, we get emotional instruction. Comparing that to composers like Stravinsky or Schoenberg, who we brought up earlier, whose music disrupts expectation, film sources often do the opposite. And it's definitely becoming a pretty big theme here, as you can see that Adorno valued music that resists easy emotional consumption. Protest music, artists like, we'll just use Kendrick Lamar as our example here, or Bob Dylan, Public Enemy, create politically charged music that critiques power structures. Would Adorno see this as resistance? He might, but he might also argue that once protest music becomes commercially successful, it too becomes absorbed into the culture industry. Especially talking about Kendrick Lamar, right? This is a guy who made his entire come up, from the city of Compton, writing really powerful protest music to racial inequality, especially in his earlier years. And nowadays, when you look at some of his performances, like the Super Bowl halftime show, and some of his more recent ventures, a lot of people are starting to feel like Kendrick Lamar is becoming the stereotype that he spent all of his career mocking and bringing to light that it exists. It's crazy to think about, Kendrick Lamar, out of all people, who is one of the most successful protesting rap artists of all time, is falling into this category or in this system of, mainstream music. I'm sure it's hard to get away from, if it makes him a lot of money, but there's definitely a trend, nowadays with some of these artists like Kendrick Lamar, who Rage Against the Machine is another example, kind of conforming to the norms of society or the structure of the business years later. Many critics argue Adorno dismissed popular music unfairly. He famously criticized jazz, which today we see as one of the most complex and improvisational forms in American music, one of the most expressive forms of music. Listeners aren't robots. People from identities, communities, and resistance movements through pop music. Thinking of the civil rights movement songs or punk rock DIY culture, Adorno may have overlooked how audiences reinterpret and repurpose music. So, Adorno, to conclude, forces us to think about and ask uncomfortable questions. Are we listening critically? Is music shaping us rather than we shape it? Does capitalism limit aesthetic freedom? Even if we reject his ideas, his warning remains powerful. When art is pure commodity, it risks losing its critical edge. In the age of Spotify, TikTok trends, franchise film soundtracks, he may say the culture industry didn't disappear, it just got better at disguising itself. An interesting thought. So that's going to do it all for me this week, and thanks so much.